Bore da, good morning everybody and welcome to the second day of the Wales Biodiversity Partnership Conference. Croeso I ail ddiwrnod cynhadledd Partneriaeth Bioamrywiaeth Cymru. Fy enw I ydy Manon Lewis a dwi'n gweithio fel rheolwr bioamrywiaeth a gwydnwch ecosystemau I Cyfoeth Naturiol Cymru. A mi fyddai'n hwyluso'r sesiwn o bore yma. My name is Manon Lewis and I'm the Biodiversity and Ecosystem Manager for Natural Resources Wales, and I'll be facilitating the session this morning. So without more to do, I'll introduce you to Matt Tebbutt, who will be giving our first presentation in this session. A Stitch in Time. We'll then go straight on to James Byrne and his presentation, and afterwards we'll have a question and answer session. Over to you, Matt. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Manon. So my name is Matt Tebbutt and I'm going to talk about a project where we've been addressing the pressure on ecological networks in Pembrokeshire called Stitch in Time. During the presentation, I'm just going to talk about the best practice, the project rationale, a lot of emphasis on the survey, our best practice, which is high intensity control for the invasive annual Himalayan balsam, and also an exit strategy called monitoring and maintenance. I'll look at the problems with Japanese knotweed being a perennial. It's a little bit trickier to deal with, and I'll do my best to summarize. So the two species we're targeting in this Stitch in Time project is Himalayan balsam, which is an invasive annual. It spreads by seed, and then the Japanese knotweed, which spreads by a rhizome. Very well-known plants now. Himalayan balsam, pink flowers; Japanese knotweed, pink white flowers. They spread by water, especially Himalayan balsam. So when those seeds start to ping off those pods and spread along catchments, you get quite large area infestations. Now, in terms of the impacts of these species, it's quite well documented in the literature now that we're doing good work if we are managing these species at a landscape scale. It's essentially, they outcompete our native flora for space, lights and nutrients, but also there's evidence to suggest that they are detrimental to pollinators in the landscape as well. And it was this paper in 2018 by Verbegan et al. That really hit home for me the impact Himalayan balsam can have on a pollinator network. So essentially what that diagram is showing on the letter D there, that schematic is showing that a pollinator's diet, if you like, is quite diverse. When you put Himalayan balsam in that system, it becomes very fixated upon Himalayan balsam, and that can have a detrimental impact, it's thought, on the nutrient intake of the pollinators, and that can affect not only the individual perhaps, but the wider colonies. So there's lots of evidence out to suggest that managing invasive non-native species is the way to go, and it was the National Park and the Pembrokeshire Nature Partnership in 2015 that selected the Cwmgwaun, North Pembrokeshire, as a pilot to try out our project control, and also the Porthgain catchment. But we're currently in 2020 and we have 5 catchments now within this project. Cwmgwaun and Porthgain are in that monitoring and maintenance phase that I'll come to shortly. Castle Martin Course, Afon Clydach and the Cable catchment, they're in this high intensity phase of control. We've only just started, thanks to the Welsh Government's Enabling Natural Resources and Wellbeing grant. So essentially, the project rationale is a catchment approach to survey, which means including all water. And there's also a catchment approach to control. So we're being very thorough, we're starting from the top and we're working down. So it's quite high intensity, it's quite high in resource, be it time or spending money. But what we've kind of come to the conclusion is that we've got a bit of a sustainable model, perhaps, approaching here. And we've noticed now we can maintain the success as the resource needed drops. We can maintain that after quite a high intensity phase. So is this a sustainable Stitch in Time? I'll let you decide after, but I'm going to go through some maps. And this is the Cwmgwaun in 2015. Now lots of orange dots represent Japanese knotweed. The pink dots on the map there represent Himalayan balsam. You may think, gee whiz, there's a problem with knotweed in the Gwaun, and out of the 5 catchments, the Cwmgwaun has got the most instances of Japanese knotweed. With Japanese knotweed, you can visit that dot and you can treat that square meterage, etc. of Japanese knotweed. What's important with Himalayan balsam is to contextualize the infestation with water. So this is exactly the same catchment map, but we have the highlighted water. So the green areas, the green water, There's no Himalayan balsam present there. That's been verified. The pink areas, there's Himalayan balsam present, and we've highlighted Kilkiffath and Pont Van Brook as two tributaries in the Gwaun Valley. Now you can see a top-down infestation. Now, Himalayan balsam is a prolific seed producer. Not only when it hits water, it will spread away from water and it will create an area infestation or an outside edge. And here we have some polygons then on the two tributaries, Kilkiffath and Pont Van Brook. Now the land use will kind of impact how far away from water it travels, it can disperse. Generally, silage fields and intensive grazing, they don't really get a foothold, but they'll travel along the corridors of the hedgerows, etc. And then when you start to hit willow and wet habitat, the habitat that's remaining wild in these places, that's when it can really take a foothold. The Gwaun Valley infestation in total is 8.5 hectares. This area you're looking at, these tributaries, about 3 hectares. So the catchment approach is high intensity. Essentially, we've just developed a best practice. And for me now, for Himalayan balsam, which is a majority now what I'm going to talk about, it's a 12-month control season. Long gone are the days of starting controlling Himalayan balsam in June and July. We actually start creating access in the winter outside the nesting season in November to February, and then we start control in March. All the way through to November, we're visiting sites once every 3 weeks, so it's quite high intensity. We're preventing that life cycle. The control has to be effective, which I'll go into. Now, I'll happily spend time and resource and money if we can tick various boxes, okay? If we can be consistent, committed, and thorough when we're carrying out our best practice and we're focusing on outside edges, the source areas, and satellite infestations, then let's do it. Let's spend the money. So just as an example then, a satellite infestation, the yellow arrow there, that's pointing to an infestation which is isolated away from the main infestation on these tributaries. An outside edge, essentially, is the giant polygon that's created when it spreads away from water, and it's getting to the very periphery of that polygon and working down methodically. And in the source area, so for the Cwm Gwaun, Kilkiffath and Pont Van were the sources for infestation for Himalayan balsam for the catchment. So if you can tick those boxes, then I think it's definitely worth initiating control in the catchment approach. So as I said, in winter, get in there, cut out some access. If you don't have access, you don't have a lot really. You really need to be able to get into some of these places and start early. Seems to be a problem with some of these slides coming up. So we do pull baby balsam. Now we strategically focus that on these tributary areas, on the sources. The main river, you wouldn't need to be putting the baby balsam just yet. You focus this kind of high intensity phase where it matters, where the balsam is coming from. But the control has to be effective, and we've learned that it's very well pulling balsam, hanging it to dry on fences and logs, etc. But if you don't remove that bottom node where there's earth still attached, it seems common sense really, it's still going to flower and it's still going to set seed. If you're putting Himalayan balsam in a large group and you're making large piles of balsam, check your piles. It's really important to do that. Turn the pile every couple of weeks. Otherwise, as you can see, they'll regenerate and they will set seed. Start early. Now again, these have been pulled up, thrown on the ground, been left for quite a while, and as you can see, these are really tough, hardy plants. They'll just arch their heads up and they'll still be able to set seed. So our control has to be effective as part of this best practice, okay? So this is down south now in the Castle Martin Course catchment, which is one of our new areas, and we've got an infestation of about 21 hectares in total. We're working on about 16 hectares down here, again at this catchment rationale, starting from the top, identifying the source areas, and this is one of them. This is a woodland, and it's about 9 acres or so 3 hectares or so, of just solid Himalayan balsam. You need to get in there. You need to clear some access. This looks severe, but the thing is, you cannot control Himalayan balsam at a strategic level if you're not going to make some big decisions, and this is one of them. You need to get your access in, but by getting access, you're indirectly going to encourage germination, which is ideal. Okay, we want these plants to germinate so we can effectively control them. If you take out an area of scrub to allow balsam to germinate, you must then undertake control, because it's going to go nuts and you're going to have a lot of seed being produced if you don't control that. This is what you want to turn up to in April. So once you've taken your access, you go to your site in April and you start strimming. You'll have 1 of 7 cuts, and the aim is to exhaust that seed bank. So you cut in April, you cut in May, you cut in June with your strimmer, because it keeps coming back like this. It will continue to germinate, and then come July, come June, you only need to walk around hand pulling. But again, trimming, you have to be effective. Cut as low down as possible, otherwise, as you can see, one stem will turn into several plants. These will set seed and you've lost your battle there. So that's the same marker, marker 1 at Chapel Hill Wood down at Castle Martin Course. And within one season, you can see that there's a visual change there, and there's actually natural recovery. We don't go around throwing seeds around. There's already a seed bank, and there's already perennial roots under the balsam. It just couldn't get through. So meadow sweet, campion, foxgloves, they're already there, but they're starting to show. Wood avens as well. But we control all the way through to November, and this is the first week of November in 2020 down on the same site, and there's been germination, and it's continued to flower and set seeds. So that is quite a long control season, I grant you. This incidentally turned to grass, but I'm sure we'll get some more colour as the seed banks get spread around a bit. So I want to encourage the germination of an invasive annual to really limit the seed bank as quickly as possible, and it's possible in one season. Again, another site, just to give you an idea of some of these infestations, impenetrable when they get from water into woodland. And this particular site in Cable is looking completely different within one season. Sorry, there we go. So that's how the site looks now. Within one season, a massive change, and there's natural recovery already ongoing. Ideally, what we want is the perfect sign of spring in these woodlands. So your wood anemone, one of my favourites, and lesser celandine. This is on the same site, but balsam had not yet got here. But this is a sign of spring that we want to see. We don't want to see this, and this is essentially the same wood a lot earlier. Lots of little Himalayan balsam coming up with nettles and cleavers struggling to get through. So back down south, we're back in the Castle Martin Course catchment, and I just want to show you the status map, that really colourful map there. So green, no balsam. Orange, we're in progress. We're undergoing our best practice, and you'll see there's a pink line, and then we've got a bit of orange where we're undergoing. So that doesn't really make sense. You're probably thinking, because that's you've got a source that's going to affect that area down below there. We can justify getting involved there because the outside edge is so large. You're talking acres and acres away from water, so you can push that back to water while you get onto your source areas. The land use in that pink area between the two areas, which are in progress, are grazing, and it gets grazed pretty intensively right down to the edge. And so there was only very small amounts of balsam within those areas. As soon as it hit a bit of decent deciduous woodland, it went nuts. And so that's why you can really justify getting involved, even if it doesn't really look to make sense on a map. So that's what it was. That's the woodland, and the slides are. There we go. So that's how it's looking now at Chapel Hill Wood, a massive visual change, and there's a bit of natural recovery going on. But you have to keep on top of those plants, and that's where the monitoring and maintenance comes in, which I'm going to go into now. So that's the 2015 Gwaun catchment. And so 2015-16, again, you can see we started lower down there. There's a bit of balsam above, but again, it was a land use. We could justify it. There was such a large area further down, we could really justify pushing that back to water, while focusing on the tributaries, Kilkifforth, Pont Van Broek, high intensity control, being thorough, being consistent, knocking those sources areas, those satellite areas on the head. And again then, so this is the situation now in 2017. So everything's in progress. There's no pink on this map. You're seeing things, it's an error. So everything's in progress now in the Gwaun Valley. That's 2017. And where we are now in 2019, 2020, is the monitoring and maintenance phase. So everything's gone from thousands and thousands of stems from large area infestations to just walking around putting individual stems, rogue plants. A little bit of work left to do down at Lower Town Fishguard towards the end of the catchment, but that's fine. That makes sense. We've knocked the source areas on the head. So about 1.5 hectares left to do in the Gwaun Valley. So this reduced cost then, it comes in this monitoring and maintenance phase. You're still going to spend your focus at the sources, the satellite areas, the tributaries, but you don't need to visit really until July, until the plant is really visible, until balsam is pink and you can see it from a distance, and you can go there then and undertake control. At some point it will get to a stage where it's only an annual visit and then a biannual visit, and of course you can use volunteers and landowners to help inform and keep a lookout. And also we continue to verify the absence of where there's no Himalayan balsam being recorded in the catchment. And again, in one season you can make a big difference, and it's just keeping on top of those few plants. This is just a lovely graph here that shows the reduction in time and resource needed over the 5 years at the tributary Kilkiffath in the Cwm Gwaun. And so a nice profile there, a nice drop. There's a little bit of an increase in 2019 because we're just covering a larger area, just following animal tracks where balsam can spread as well. But generally, everything's looking much better, from polygons of about 80% or so density of balsam right down to almost 5%. And there's natural recovery ongoing, which is great. And exactly the same for the other tributary Pont van Book. So we start to feel now that we can demonstrate sustainability. I think with the invasive annual, it definitely works. And, you know, this is a really good project rationale to adopt for improving resilience in catchments. But economic impact is quite tricky on a site-per-site basis. There was always going to be potatoes in this field, and it was also always going to be followed by an arable crop of some type. But you can see the visual difference there within one season. There's still balsam hanging on. You know, there's docks coming back, there's nettles coming back. That land set aside is much better. And this site itself, down at the south, was an isolated satellite. It hadn't joined on to the wider infestation, so it was really key. And the landowner really got to grips with this as well, which is great. Now, Japanese knotweed is a different beast. It spreads by its rhizome, its root, and it also spreads by cutting, by mismanagement, essentially. But we want to prevent it getting near water, especially that rhizome if we can. Now, the project itself has had really good success over the years of treating Japanese knotweed. The above ground mass can go from thousands of stems, like you see there, to literally tens of stems. The control method, unfortunately, it's not organic to my knowledge. It's the necessary evil of a bit of herbicide. So interesting talk to follow this one. But it's specialist work. The resource use does drop, so your time and your money spent on a site does go down quite significantly after you initiate treatment. But again, the land use, so if there's any cutting nearby or grazing, or if it's a dynamic environment like a river, it can really increase the spread of this plant. But in the catchments we work on, Himalayan balsam has a much larger presence than Japanese knotweed in terms of top to bottom infestation. So all those orange dots that you saw in the first survey map have been treated over the years, over the project. So the problem with cutting is that you spread bits around if you strim or flail Japanese knotweed, and you contaminate that machine, and then you lend it to your father-in-law, and you're going to cause them some problems. But you can see there that this is not the ideal stage of the growth to treat. So this has been strimmed. It's made the plant smaller, and it's not going to take up the herbicide as efficiently if it was just left. So seriously, no cutting. And again, there's actually some evidence out there to suggest that we shouldn't be mowing Japanese knotweed. So please don't mow it. Please don't strim it. So I'm much now. The prevention is key, and the Japanese knotweed is such a tricky beast. We need to prevent it getting into water in the first place. Now, the treatment windows, generally late summer, autumn, it tends to tie in now with the wet season in Pembrokeshire, and we tend to get a lot of flooding there, and that's going to be moving that rhizome around. So there's an argument to say, should we start treating a lot earlier? But essentially, initiating treatment, whether it's by a river or whether it's in a farmyard, is key. Now, herbicide, obviously there's attitudes towards its use, and we are able to treat near Japanese knotweed near water through the consent process with Natural Resources Wales, and that's what we use for that. To mitigate, what we've done in the Quine Valley in partnership with the County Council is mark verge knotweed by a roadside to prevent it from getting cut. If that's cut, then I rock up with my knapsack and I've got nothing to treat. So I really want things left so we can get the efficient treatment program initiated. And about 3 seasons of continuous treatment, you really get on top of Japanese knotweed. So it is possible, and it is another project success. Now, a big thank you to all the volunteers, landowners, and contractors who've been involved with the project. We've really developed some expertise over the years, and it's great to see these being applied. Incidentally, a winter job for Japanese knotweed I forgot to mention is again clearing out some access, just going out there and slashing some of those dead canes away so you can get into those stands later in the year. But no, a really big thank you to all of those who've been involved. This is a sort of a summary now. So these are good species to target in riparian areas. There's a bit of a crossover while you're maintaining your Himalayan balsam as under the monitoring and maintenance phase, or as free in certain areas of the catchment, you can check your Japanese knotweed. You can rock up and treat that, and you can tick the box that you've seen no flowering Himalayan balsam. There's definitely an overlap with these two species, so they're good to keep on a project together. But there are high costs involved initially, but I think we're starting to show a reduction of resource. I can't sit here and tell you how much it's going to cost for your individual catchments. They're all different. You know, the project rationale is transferable, but the costs aren't. But whatever resource you get, whether it's volunteer time or if it is a pot of cash, then if you apply that strategically and within a project rationale like this, then you're going to get sustainability and good success. Now, you'll be pleased to know that I'm going to write all this down in a toolkit. So you know, everyone will get to have a look at that without me rushing through a presentation. But obviously, resilient ecological networks is the future aim now, as the Minister alluded to in a talk yesterday. Common catchment themes, these plants are present on all the areas that we want to kind of designate as wild. You know, there are riparian areas, and they take over so much space in the landscape. So it's step one. If we're really going to get serious about turning the ecological networks along riparian areas into a more desirable state, and do the benefits for pollinators as well, then really getting on top of these plants is step one. And please be aware, if we're going to start fencing off new areas, then just let's be aware what's there before we fence it, because then that can create access issues for a project like this. And that's actually my presentation over and done with.